The music didn't just stop, it was strangled into silence. 300 of London's elite froze, their champagne flutes hovering halfway to their lips. In the center of the floor stood Mark Blackwood, the Duke of Wycliffe, the man they called the blind beast of Balaclava. He stood alone, his hand extended into the empty air, waiting for a partner everyone knew would never come. The humiliation was thick enough to choke on. They were waiting for him to break. But then, from the shadows of the servants' quarters, a single silhouette moved. She wasn't wearing silk. She wasn't wearing diamonds. She was wearing a maid's apron. And when she took his hand, the sound of the crowd's gasp was louder than any cannon fire the Duke had ever survived. This is the story of the scandal that brought an empire to its knees. The war in Crimea was over, but for Mark Blackwood, the darkness had never lifted. Wycliffe Hall sat on the edge of Mayfair like a brooding gargoyle, its curtains perpetually drawn against the grey London sky. Inside, the air smelled of beeswax, lavender, and decaying hope. Mark sat in his study, the leather of the wingback chair creaking as he shifted his weight. He didn't need to see the room to know that dust was gathering on the books he could no longer read. "The invitation has arrived, Your Grace," a voice oiled with false concern drifted from the doorway. Mark didn't turn his head. He knew exactly where his cousin, Frederick Vane, was standing. He could smell the man's cloying cologne, sandalwood and ambition. "Burn it, Frederick," Mark rasped. His voice, once a commanding baritone that had led men into the valley of death, was now rough from disuse. "Oh, I couldn't possibly," Frederick replied, stepping into the room. The floorboards groaned under his polished boots. "It is Lady Jersey's grand ball. The Queen herself is rumored to attend. For the Duke of Wycliffe to be absent. Well, people are already talking, Mark. They say you've gone mad in the dark." Mark gripped the arms of his chair, his knuckles turning white. "Let them talk. They are vultures." "Perhaps," Frederick mused, picking up a crystal paperweight from the desk and toying with it. "But vultures circle the dead. And you are not dead yet, are you, cousin? Unless, of course, the rumors about your competency are true." The lawyers were asking again about the estate management. The threat was subtle, but it landed with the precision of a sniper's bullet. Frederick was next in line for the dukedom. If Mark were declared incompetent due to his blindness and melancholia, Frederick would seize control of the fortune before the year was out. "I will attend," Mark said, his voice cold. "Excellent," Frederick smiled, a gesture lost on the blind man. "I shall arrange the carriage. Do try to look less like a corpse, Mark. We wouldn't want to frighten the debutantes down in the scullery." The world was a different kind of dark. It was the darkness of soot, steam, and endless labor. Clara Holloway scrubbed the copper pots until her fingers were raw. She was 22, with hair the color of roasted chestnuts and eyes that held a sharp, terrifying intelligence, a dangerous thing for a maid in Victorian London. She wasn't supposed to be here. 3 years ago, she had been the daughter of a respected physician in York. Then came the cholera, the debts, and the fall. Now she was just Clara, the girl who polished the silver. "He's going," whispered Mrs. Higgins, the housekeeper, rushing into the kitchen with a bundle of linens. "The master. He's going to the ball tonight." Clara paused, a soapy sponge in her hand. "The Duke." But he hasn't left the house in 2 years. Frederick's doing, I'll wager, the cook grumbled, chopping carrots with violent force. That man is a snake. He wants the Duke humiliated. He knows no lady of quality will dance with a blind man. It's a public execution, that's what it is. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. She had seen the Duke only once, from a distance, pacing the terrace at night. He moved like a caged animal, full of suppressed rage and a terrifying sort of grace. She knew something the others didn't. She knew that blindness didn't make a man helpless, it only made him different. Her father had treated soldiers returning from the front. She knew the look of a man who had seen too much, even when he could no longer see at all. He needs his dress uniform brushed, Mrs. Higgins fretted. And the valet is drunk again. Clara, you have the steadiest hands. Go up to the master's dressing room. Prepare the sash and medals. Clara's heart gave a strange, jagged thump. Me, Mrs. Higgins, go girl. Before Frederick sends one of his spies up there, Clara hurried up the servants' stairs, the noise of the kitchen fading into the heavy silence of the upper floors. She entered the dressing room quietly. The door to the adjoining bedroom was ajar. She saw him. Mark was standing by the window, his profile cut sharp against the fading light. He was terrifyingly handsome, dark hair sweeping over a brow furrowed in permanent pain, a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, a souvenir of the explosion that took his sight at Sevastopol. He turned his head sharply. Who is there? Clara froze. It is the maid, your grace. I am here to prepare your uniform. Mark's shoulders relaxed slightly, but his guard remained up. Do it quickly, and do not pity me. I can smell pity like rotting meat. I have no pity for you, your grace, Clara said, her voice steady, surprising herself. Only respect for the uniform. Mark went still. Silence stretched between them, heavy and electric. What is your name, Clara, sir? Clara, he tested. The word as if tasting it. You step lightly, Clara. Like a soldier, life is a battlefield for some of us too, your grace. It was a bold thing to say to a duke. For a second, she thought he might dismiss her. Instead, a corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. Then prepare my armor, Clara. I march into hell tonight. The ballroom was a kaleidoscope of silk, jewels, and malice. The chandeliers blazed with the light of 1,000 candles, illuminating the cream of British society. But the atmosphere was not one of joy, it was one of predatory anticipation. When the footman announced, His Grace the Duke of Wycliffe, the chatter didn't just fade, it died. Mark stood at the top of the grand staircase, his hand resting lightly on Frederick's arm. He wore his dress uniform, the scarlet stark against the sea of black tailcoats. The medals on his chest gleamed, the Victoria Cross, the Legion of Honor. But his eyes were covered by a sleek, black silk bandage, a concession to the scarring that society deemed too gruesome to view. He descended the stairs, every step a calculated risk. He counted them. 1, 2, 3. You are doing splendidly, cousin, Frederick whispered, his voice dripping with poison. Lady Arabella is here. Your former fiancée. She is looking at you with... Oh dear. Is that disgust? Mark's jaw tightened. Guide me to the corner, Frederick. I wish only to make an appearance. Nonsense, Frederick said loudly, ensuring those nearby could hear. You are the Duke. You must dance. The waltz is beginning. Frederick steered him not to a quiet corner, but directly to the edge of the dance floor. Then, with a sleight of hand that was pure evil, he stepped away. Frederick, Mark whispered. No answer. Mark reached out, his fingers brushing empty air. He was alone. In the middle of the most crowded room in London, he was utterly, devastatingly alone. The orchestra struck up a Strauss waltz. Couples swirled past him, the wind of their movement brushing against his face. He could hear the whispers. Look at him. Pathetic, a blind cripple. Why did he come? Frederick says he talks to walls. Mad as a hatter. Lady Arabella, the woman who had sworn to love him until the news of his injury arrived, drifted past on the arm of a viscount. Truly tragic, she said, loud enough for him to hear. He should have had the decency to die in the war. Mark stood rigid. The heat of the room felt oppressive. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He had faced Russian bayonets with less fear than this. This was a social assassination. He knew he had to leave. But he had lost his bearings. If he moved, he would crash into the dancers. If he stayed, he was a spectacle. Is there no one, he murmured, his voice cracking. Is there no one who will stand with me? The question hung in the air, unanswered. The circle around him widened. They were watching him drown. Meanwhile, in the shadows of the velvet curtains near the service entrance, Clara was watching. She had been sent to deliver a message to Frederick's carriage driver, but she had lingered, drawn by the music. She saw the cruelty unfold. She saw the man who had spoken to her with such raw honesty earlier, that evening now being torn apart by the wolves in satin. She saw his hand twitch, a tremor of pure panic. It broke her heart. But more than that, it ignited a fury in her gut. This was a hero of the empire, and they were treating him like a circus freak. She looked down at her attire. A grey wool dress. A white apron. A servant's cap. To step onto that floor was social suicide. It was grounds for dismissal without a reference. It was madness. She looked at Mark's face. The proud lift of his chin was faltering. To hell with it, Clara thought. She moved. The sound of her boots on the parquet floor was heavy, distinct from the soft slide of dancing slippers. She walked past a gaping earl. She brushed past a horrified dowager. She cut a straight line through the crowd, her head held high, her eyes locked on the blind duke. The music faltered as the musicians noticed the disruption. The conductor, confused, lowered his baton. The waltz ground to a halt. Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Mark sensed the shift. The whispers had stopped. The air currents changed. Someone was approaching. Frederick, he asked, hope warring with suspicion. No, Your Grace, a clear, steady voice said. Mark froze. He knew that voice. Clara, the crowd gasped. A maid. Speaking to a duke. In the middle of the ballroom. Clara stopped 2 feet in front of him. She could feel 300 pairs of eyes burning into her back. She could see Frederick pushing his way through the crowd, his face purple with rage. She had seconds. "Your Grace," she said, loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "The music is waiting. And I believe you promised this dance to a friend." She extended her hand. It was a violation of every rule of Victorian society. Servants did not touch masters. Women did not ask men to dance. The poor did not mix with the peerage. Mark stood motionless. His world was darkness, but in that darkness, a hand had reached out. Not out of pity, he remembered her voice from the dressing room, but out of solidarity. He could hear Frederick shouting, "Seize that girl." "Someone remove her." Mark made his choice. He reached out and found her hand. Her skin was rough, calloused from scrubbing floors, warm and alive. It felt real in a room full of ghosts. "I believe I did," Mark said, his voice ringing out with sudden, returning authority. He gripped her hand firmly. "Guide me, Clara." He turned his head toward the orchestra. "Play," he roared. "Or by God, I will have every one of you conscripted by morning." The terrified conductor frantically tapped his baton. The waltz began again, hesitant at first, then swelling. Clara placed her other hand on his shoulder. It was broad and hard as granite. He placed his hand on her waist. "I don't know the steps of the court," she whispered, panic finally fluttering in her chest. "Then we shall invent them," he murmured, pulling her close. They moved. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the fluid, rehearsed gliding of the aristocracy. It was something rawer. Mark moved with the aggressive grace of a soldier. Clara moved with the desperate determination of a survivor. They spun in the center of the floor, an island of grey wool and scarlet uniform in a sea of frozen silk. "They are staring," Mark said near her ear. "Let them stare," Clara replied, tightening her grip on his hand. "You are the Duke of Wycliffe. They are just people watching a man dance. You are brave, Clara," he said softly. "Foolish. But brave. I am currently unemployed, I suspect," she said with a dry laugh. Mark laughed. It was a rusty, barking sound, but it was genuine. "Not if I have anything to say about it." For 3 minutes, the world narrowed down to the touch of their hands and the beat of the music. For the first time in 2 years, Mark didn't feel blind. He felt the sway of her body, the rhythm of her breathing. He felt sane. As the music reached its crescendo, Frederick finally broke through the crowd, followed by 2 burly footmen. The music stopped. The spell broke. "Get your filthy hands off him," Frederick shrieked, grabbing Clara's arm and wrenching her away. Mark roared, spinning around blindly. "Unpropped. Who touches her? She is a thief," Frederick lied smoothly, playing to the crowd. "I saw her stealing silver from the cloakroom, and now she molests you on the dance floor." "Take her away." "No," Clara cried, struggling as the footmen grabbed her. "I stole nothing, Mark," Frederick hissed in his ear. "She is a common servant, making a fool of you. She's likely drunk." "I am saving your reputation." Mark stood panting, his chest heaving. He couldn't see. He didn't know who was telling the truth. The doubt, the cursed doubt that Frederick had planted for months, crept in. Was she mocking him? Was this all a cruel game? Wait, Mark commanded. Take her to the authorities, Frederick yelled over him. Get her out of my sight, the footman dragged Clara backward. She didn't scream. She just looked at Mark, her eyes filling with tears. Your Grace, she called out, not begging, but calling him to attention. The step. Count the steps, Your Grace. Don't let them make you stumble. And then she was gone, dragged out the double doors, leaving Mark standing alone once again in the center of the ballroom. But this time, the silence wasn't mocking. It was stunned. And Mark wasn't trembling. He straightened his sash. He turned his bandaged eyes toward where Frederick stood. Take me home, cousin, Mark said, his voice low and deadly. We have much to discuss. The cell at the Bow Street station smelled of damp stone, unwashed bodies, and despair. Clara sat on a wooden bench that was more splinter than seat, shivering in the damp chill of the London night. Her apron was gone, torn away in the struggle, and her grey dress was stained with the mud of the street where the footmen had thrown her before the constables arrived. Quiet down in there, the jailer shouted, banging his truncheon against the bars. Clara wrapped her arms around herself. She wasn't crying. Tears were a luxury she couldn't afford. She was calculating. Frederick Vane had accused her of stealing a silver snuff box. It was a lie, of course, but in 1856, the word of a gentleman, even a minor aristocrat, outweighed the oath of 1,000 maids. The sentence for theft of that value could be transportation to the colonies, or worse, hard labor in a prison hulk. She thought of the Duke. Mark. For 3 minutes, she hadn't been a maid, and he hadn't been a broken invalid. They had been equals. She closed her eyes and could almost feel the phantom pressure of his hand on her waist. Count the steps, she had told him. She hoped he was counting. Because if he stopped counting, the darkness would swallow him whole. Wycliffe Hall, the library, Mark sat in the dark. He had forbidden the servants to light the lamps. You are being unreasonable, Mark, Frederick said, pouring himself a generous glass of the Duke's best brandy. The sound of the liquid splashing into the crystal was deafening to Mark's heightened senses. The girl was a thief. I found the snuff box in her pocket myself. Did you? Mark asked. His voice was dangerously quiet. Strange. I held her hand, Frederick. Her palms were rough, calloused, scrubbing brushes and lye soap. Those are the hands of a worker, not a pickpocket. A thief has soft fingers, the better to slide into silk pockets. Frederick laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. You are romanticizing a common criminal because she showed you a moment of pity. You are unwell, cousin. The excitement of the ball was too much. Doctor, Sterling suggests we increase your dosage of the tonic. Your nerves are frayed. My nerves are steel, Frederick. I survived the siege of Sevastopol and came back half a man, Frederick snapped, his veneer of politeness cracking. Drink your tonic. Go to bed. I have business to attend to in the morning regarding the estate. Frederick shoved a glass into Mark's hand. The smell hit Mark instantly, bitter almonds and cloying sweetness. The same medicine he had been taking. For 6 months to soothe the ocular nerves. Mark waited until Frederick's footsteps faded down the hall. He didn't drink. He walked to the fireplace and poured the contents into the ashes. Thomas, he whispered into the darkness. From the shadows of the heavy velvet drapes, a figure emerged. Thomas, the stable master, and formerly Sergeant Thomas O'Malley of the 17th Lancers. He was the one man Frederick considered too beneath notice to fire, but he was the only man Mark trusted with his life. "I'm here, Captain," Thomas said, his voice gravelly. He still used the old rank. "Where did they take her?" "Bow Street, sir." "The charges are heavy." "Grand larceny." Frederick paid the constable a sovereign to make sure she tripped on the way to the cell. Mark's hands curled into fists. "Get the carriage." "The black one." "No crests, sir, you can't go to Bow Street." "You're blind." "Yes, but I am still the Duke of Wycliffe. And I am still your commanding officer. We are going to retrieve my dance partner, Thomas. And God help anyone who stands in our way." Bow Street, 3:30 a.m. The desk sergeant looked up, annoyed, as the heavy door swung open. "We are closed for business, mate." "Unless you're turning yourself in," the words died in his throat. A man in a black cloak stood in the doorway. He wore dark spectacles, but the bearing was unmistakable. Behind him loomed a giant of a man with a scarred face. "I believe you have a prisoner," Mark said, his voice cutting through the stale air like a saber. "A Miss Clara Holloway. We got a lot of thieves, Gov," the sergeant stammered, intimidated despite himself. "She's the one who robbed Mr. Vane, allegedly," Mark corrected. He reached into his coat and slapped a heavy pouch onto the desk. It clinked with the sound of gold sovereigns. "I am the Duke of Wycliffe." Mr. Vane was mistaken. The item in question was not stolen. It was a gift. The sergeant's eyes bulged. He looked at the gold, then at the Duke. The law was flexible when gold was involved. "A gift, Your Grace, a gift," Mark repeated. "Now release her into my custody. Immediately. Or I shall have a conversation with the Home Secretary about the state of this precinct." 10 minutes later, the cell door creaked open. Clara looked up, squinting against the lantern light. "Clara," a voice called from the corridor. She stood, her legs trembling. "Your Grace," Mark stood there, leaning on a cane, looking pale but resolute. "I am told I gave you a snuff box," he said, a dry smile touching his lips. "I must have forgotten. My memory is quite terrible these days." Clara stared at him, understanding dawning on her. He was lying to save her. "Yes, Your Grace," she whispered, stepping out of the cell. "You must have forgotten." "Come," he said, holding out his arm, not for her to guide him, but for him to guide her. "We are going home. But not to the servants' quarters. Not this time." The East Wing had been closed off since the old Duke died. It was dusty, cold, and forgotten, perfect for hiding a secret. Thomas had smuggled Clara in through the garden entrance. For the last 3 days, she had stayed in the guest suite, terrified and confused. She wasn't a prisoner, but she wasn't free. On the 4th morning, the door opened. Mark entered. He looked worse than he had at the ball. His skin was grey, and he moved with a tremor. "Thomas tells me you are comfortable," Mark said, finding a chair by memory and collapsing into it. "I am safe, Your Grace." That is more than I expected, Clara replied. She stood by the window, watching him closely. Her medical training, drilled into her by her father before society forced her into a maid's uniform, kicked in. She watched his hands. They were shaking. She watched his pupils through the thin fabric of the bandage he had removed. They were dilated so wide his eyes looked like black pools, swallowing the blue irises. "Why did you save me?" Clara asked softly. "Because you didn't flinch," Mark said, rubbing his temples. "Everyone flinches. Even Arabella. You stood your ground." "And because I don't believe Frederick. Frederick is poisoning you," Clara said. The silence that followed was absolute. Mark stopped rubbing his head. He turned his face toward her voice. "Careful, Clara. That is a dangerous accusation. I am the daughter of Dr. Arthur Holloway," Clara said, stepping closer. "My father was a specialist in toxicology and nervous disorders before he died. I spent 10 years mixing his compounds. I know the smell that clings to you, Mark." She used his first name. He didn't correct her. "It smells of bitter almonds and nightshade," she continued. "Belladonna. Atropine. The doctor gives me drops for the pain in my eyes." "The blast. It burned the corneas." "May I?" Clara asked, reaching out toward his face. Mark hesitated, then nodded. Clara gently lifted his chin. She peeled back his eyelids. The light from the window hit his eyes. He winced, turning away sharply. "It hurts. It hurts because your eyes are sensitive to light," Clara said, her voice rising with excitement. "Mark, if you were truly blind from nerve damage or destroyed corneas, the light wouldn't hurt. You wouldn't feel it at all." Mark froze. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying the belladonna is keeping your pupils permanently dilated. It blurs your vision, makes close objects impossible to see, and makes light agonizing. Combined with the laudanum he likely has you drinking for nerves, you are in a state of chemical blindness." Mark stood up, knocking the chair over. "Hey! He has stolen 2 years of my life." "Sit down," Clara commanded, forgetting her station entirely. "We need to test this. When was your last dose?" "This morning." "Frederick watches me take it." "Don't take another drop," Clara said firmly. "It will be painful. The withdrawal will give you headaches that will make you want to scream. But if I am right, in 3 days you will see the candle on that table." Mark reached out, his hand trembling, and found her arm. He gripped it hard. "If you are right, Clara," he rasped, "then Frederick Vane is a dead man walking." The withdrawal was not merely a physical ordeal, it was a descent into hell. For the first 48 hours, Mark did not know where he was. The East Wing, usually cold and silent, became a furnace of fever dreams. The belladonna and laudanum, which had saturated his system for 2 years, were clawing their way out, and they were not leaving quietly. He thrashed on the antique four-poster bed, his sheets soaked with sweat. He hallucinated the battlefield at Sevastopol, the smell of gunpowder, the screams of horses, the flash of the explosion that had taken his sight. But in these nightmares, the enemy wasn't a faceless Russian soldier. It was Frederick. Frederick laughing. Frederick holding a torch to his eyes. "Drink," a voice commanded from the fog. It was a cool, firm voice. It cut through the terror. He felt a cup press against his cracked lips. "It burns," he groaned, turning his head away. "It is water, Mark." "Drink," the voice insisted. He obeyed. The coolness soothed his parched throat. A damp cloth was pressed to his forehead, smelling faintly of lavender and antiseptic. Hands, small, rough, capable hands, held his shoulders down when the tremors became violent. Clara did not leave his side. She couldn't. Thomas, the faithful stable master, was guarding the door downstairs, spinning tales to the household staff that the Duke had taken a turn for the worse and was contagious with a fever. Upstairs, Clara was fighting a war for the Duke's sanity. She watched him with a clinical eye that barely masked her terrifying affection. She saw the proud, broken man beneath the sweat-drenched linen. She wiped the bile from his chin when he retched. She hummed low, tuneless melodies when he cried out in the grip of a migraine that threatened to split his skull. On the fourth night, the screaming stopped. The fever broke, leaving him weak as a kitten, drifting in a heavy, dreamless sleep. Clara sat in the velvet armchair by the window, her body aching with exhaustion. She hadn't slept in 3 days. She watched the rise and fall of his chest. If I am wrong, she thought, a cold knot of dread tightening in her stomach, if his blindness is real, and I have just put him through this torture for nothing. God forgive me. Day 7, the first light Mark woke to silence. For 2 years, waking up had meant facing a wall of impenetrable grey fog, accompanied by a dull, throbbing ache behind his eyes. He braced himself for it. He waited for the grey. But the grey was different. It was lighter. He blinked. His eyelids felt heavy, gritty. He opened them again. There was a shape. It was blurry, like looking through a window pane lashed with heavy rain, but it was there. A vertical rectangle of pale luminescence. A window. He turned his head. The movement made him dizzy, but his eyes tracked the light. He saw the dark, looming shadow of a wardrobe. He saw the flicker of a candle on the nightstand, not just the heat of it, but the actual dancing orange flame. And he saw her. Clara had fallen asleep in the chair, her head resting awkwardly on her hand. In the dim light, she was a study in grey and cream. Her mob cap was askew, revealing waves of chestnut hair she usually kept severely pinned. Mark lay there, barely daring to breathe. He was afraid that if he spoke, the vision would shatter like glass. Tears pricked his eyes, not from the harshness of the light, but from the sheer, overwhelming beauty of sight. He swung his legs out of the bed. His muscles were atrophied, weak from days of bed rest. He stumbled, catching himself on the bedside table. The noise, a heavy thud, woke her. Clara jumped up, disoriented. "Your Grace." "Mark, you shouldn't be up." She rushed to him, her hands reaching out to guide him, assuming he was still lost in the dark. Mark grabbed her wrists. He held them tight, anchoring himself. He looked down at her face. It was swimming in and out of focus, but he could see the wide, fearful shape of her eyes and the curve of her mouth. "You look tired, Clara," he rasped, his voice unused and gravelly. Clara froze. She searched his face. His eyes, usually wandering or fixed on a middle distance, were locked onto hers. The pupils were no longer the blown-out black discs, of a belladonna addict. They were contracting, reacting to the candlelight. They were a piercing, vibrant blue. "Can you?" Her voice trembled. "Can you see me? You have a mole," he whispered, lifting a hand to brush a spot just above her left eyebrow. "And your eyes. They are the color of dry moss." "I never knew." Clara let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. "It was the poison." "I knew it." Mark's wonder evaporated in an instant, replaced by a cold, glacial rage. He looked at his hands, then at the room, realizing the magnitude of the crime committed against him. "He stole 2 years," Mark said, the words falling like stones. "He made me a cripple. He watched me stumble. He laughed at me. He tried to stand straight, his soldier's bearing returning despite his physical weakness. I am going to kill him. I will go downstairs, find my saber, and I will cut him down where he stands." "No," Clara pushed him back onto the bed. "Listen to me. You cannot kill him. He murdered me, Clara. He murdered the man I was, and if you kill him now, the law will hang you," Clara argued fiercely, her face inches from his. "Frederick has spent 2 years telling the world you are mad. If you storm downstairs and kill him, it proves him right. You will end up in the gallows, and Frederick wins." Mark gripped the sheets, his knuckles white. "Then what do we do? Do I let him walk free?" "No," Clara said, her eyes hard and dangerous. "We don't kill him. We destroy him. We take his reputation, his fortune, and his freedom. We make him do it to himself." The war room Thomas brought them food, bread, cheese, and cold roast beef. He wept openly when he saw the Duke catch an apple tossed to him. "He's bringing the lawyer tomorrow," Thomas reported, wiping his eyes with a dirty rag. "Mr. Pendergast. I heard in the stables. Frederick was boasting to the groom. Said the old blind bear was finally being put out to pasture. They have papers, Captain. Something about an asylum. Bedlam," Mark spat, chewing the beef with savage intensity. "He wants power of attorney. He wants to commit me. Then we must give him a performance he will never forget," Clara said. She was pacing the room, her mind working with the precision of a general. "Mark, you must still be blind." Mark looked at her, repulsed. "I cannot go back to that darkness." "I won't, you must," Clara insisted. "If he knows you can see, he will run. He will claim it was a mistake, an allergy. He will slip away with the money he's already embezzled. We need him to incriminate himself. We need him to feel safe." She picked up the vial of medicine Frederick had left. "I have emptied this. I filled it with saline water. When he comes to give you your dose before the meeting, you must take it. You must let him think he has blinded you again, and the meeting, you will wear the dark glasses," Clara said. "You will stumble. You will ask for his help. You will feed his arrogance until he is so fat with it that he chokes." Mark looked at Clara. In the candlelight, with her hair loose and her eyes blazing with intelligence, she was the most formidable creature he had ever seen. "You are a dangerous woman, Clara Holloway," he said softly. "I am a maid, Your Grace," she replied with a dry smile. "We are used to cleaning up messes." The following afternoon, the library smelled of old paper and deceit. Frederick Vane stood by the fireplace, checking his reflection in the mirror. He looked impeccable in a charcoal frock coat, his hair pomaded to perfection. Mr. Pendergast, the family solicitor, sat at the heavy oak desk, arranging a stack of documents with trembling hands. Are you sure about this, Mr. Vane? Pendergast whispered, wiping sweat from his upper lip. Committing a peer of the realm. It requires 2 physicians' signatures. I have the signatures, Frederick dismissed him, patting his breast pocket. Dr. Sterling and Dr. Crone. Both very expensive and very agreeable men. Mark is a danger to himself. We are saving him. The heavy double doors creaked open. Mark entered. He looked frail. He leaned heavily on his cane, tapping it loudly against the parquet floor. Tab, tab, tab. The sound echoed in the tense silence. He wore his dark spectacles, obscuring his eyes completely. Frederick, Mark called out, his voice wavering. He turned his head slightly to the left of where Frederick was actually standing. Frederick smirked at Pendergast. See, completely helpless. I am here, cousin, Frederick said, stepping forward but not offering a hand. And Mr. Pendergast is here as well. We have the business matters to attend to. Ah. Yes, Mark shuffled forward. He deliberately clipped his hip against the corner of a side table, knocking over a small vase. It's shattered. Those. Clumsy, Mark muttered, crouching down, his hands patting the floor aimlessly. Leave it, Frederick snapped. The servants will get it. Sit down, Mark. For God's sake, you are embarrassing yourself. Mark found the chair and sank into it. I am tired, Frederick. The shadows. They are very heavy today. Then let us make this quick, Frederick said, sliding the document across the desk. This paper simply formalizes my role as trustee. It allows me to pay the bills, manage the tenants. So you can rest. Read it to me, Mark said. It is standard legalese, Your Grace, Pendergast squeaked, unable to look the Duke in the face. Very boring. Just show me where to sign, Mark sighed, looking defeated. Frederick placed a quill in Mark's hand. He guided Mark's hand to the bottom of the page. Right here, cousin. Press hard, Mark held the pen. Behind the dark lenses of his glasses, his pupils were sharp and focused. He looked down at the paper. The text was clear. Order of committal. The patient, Mark Blackwood, to be remanded to the custody of St. Luke's Hospital for Lunatics. All titles and assets to be administered by Frederick Vane. It was a death sentence. Mark's hand began to shake. Frederick assumed it was palsy. In reality, it was the sheer effort of holding back the impulse to strangle his cousin. My hand, Mark complained. I cannot find the line. I need a guide. I will guide you, Frederick said impatiently, reaching out. No, Mark pulled his hand away. I want the maid. The one with the steady hands. Clara, Frederick rolled his eyes. That girl. Fine. If it gets this done, he snapped his fingers. You. Girl. Get in here. Clara stepped out from the shadows of the bookshelf where she had been waiting. She kept her head down, playing the submissive servant. She walked to the desk. "Guide his hand, girl," Frederick commanded. "And be quick about it." Clara placed her hand over Mark's. Her touch was warm, firm, and grounding. She squeezed his fingers, a signal. "Now." Mark gripped the pen. He didn't sign his name. With a sudden, violent motion, he slashed the pen across the paper, tearing the parchment. In large, jagged letters, he wrote one word, Treason. Frederick froze. "What? What are you doing?" Mark slowly reached up and removed his dark glasses. He folded them and placed them on the desk. He lifted his head. His blue eyes locked directly onto Frederick's face. There was no wavering, no searching, just a direct, predatory stare. "I see you, Frederick," Mark whispered. The volume was low, but the menace filled the room. Frederick stumbled back, knocking into the mantelpiece. His face drained of all color, leaving him looking like wet dough. "Impossible. The drops. I gave them to you myself." "Saline," Clara said, lifting her head. Her voice was no longer that of a servant. "Salt and water, Mr. Vane. The oldest trick in the book. You," Frederick pointed a shaking finger at her. "You witch, Mr. Pendergast," Mark said, not breaking eye contact with his cousin. "I suggest you look at the document you just asked me to sign. And then I suggest you start writing your resignation before I have you disbarred for conspiracy." Pendergast scrambled backward, clutching his chest. "I didn't know. He told me you were mad." "I swear, Your Grace, it's a lie," Frederick screamed, panic cracking his voice. He looked around wildly. His eyes landed on the heavy brass poker by the fireplace. "Frederick, don't," Mark warned, standing up. He rose to his full height, the cane forgotten on the floor. Frederick lunged. He grabbed the poker and swung it with a desperate, guttural shriek. "Look out," Clara screamed. But Mark had seen the muscles in Frederick's shoulder tensed. He had seen the shift in weight. He was a veteran of the Light Brigade. He sidestepped the clumsy swing with almost lazy grace. As Frederick stumbled past, carried by the momentum of the blow, Mark drove a short, brutal punch into his cousin's kidney, followed instantly by a right hook to the jaw. The sound of bone hitting bone was sickeningly loud. Frederick spun and collapsed to the floor, unconscious before he hit the rug. The brass poker clattered away. Mark stood over him, breathing hard, his fists still clenched. He felt a surge of triumph, clean, sharp, and undeniable. "Thomas," Mark roared. The doors flew open, and the giant Irishman rushed in. "Captain, tie him up," Mark pointed to the heap on the floor. "And send for the police." Mark turned to Clara. She was pale, her hands pressed to her chest, but she was smiling. He walked toward her, stepping over the wreckage of the vase he had broken earlier. "We did it," he breathed, reaching for her. "Clara, we did it." Relief washed over them. It was over. The nightmare was over. But the universe, it seemed, had one final twist. Just as Mark's fingers brushed Clara's arm, the sound of slow, sarcastic clapping echoed from the doorway. "Clap, clap, clap." They spun around. Standing in the entrance to the library was not the police. It was a tall, gaunt man with a jagged scar running across his nose and a stiff, noticeable limp. He held a Webley revolver in his hand, the barrel leveled straight at Mark's heart. Mark's blood ran cold. He knew that limp. He knew that scar. "Uncle Sealers," Mark whispered, disbelief warring with horror. "Hello, nephew," Lord Sealers Blackwood, the man who had supposedly died of malaria in Bombay 5 years ago, grinned, revealing yellowed teeth. Frederick always was a disappointment. He lacks the killer instinct. "I suppose if you want a job done right, you must do it yourself." He cocked the hammer of the gun. The click sounded like a thunderclap in the silent room. "Step away from the maid, Mark," Sealers said softly. "I'd hate to ruin such a pretty dress with your brains." The barrel of the Webley revolver looked like a cannon mouth in the dimly lit library. Lord Sealers Blackwood, the man the world believed had died of malaria in Bombay 5 years ago, stood with a chilling calmness. His face was ravaged by the sun, his eyes devoid of anything resembling humanity. "Uncle Sealers," Mark said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "I should have known. Frederick hasn't the spine for murder. He only has the stomach for theft. Frederick is a useful idiot," Sealers sneered, keeping the gun trained on Mark's chest. "He thought he was securing the estate for himself. He didn't know he was merely holding the door open for my resurrection. Once you were committed to the asylum and declared incompetent, and poor Frederick met with a tragic accident, the title would have reverted to the next of kin." Clara stood frozen near the desk. Sealers hadn't even looked at her. To him, she was furniture. A maid. Invisible. "You won't get away with it, Mr." Pendergast squeaked from the corner, clutching his briefcase as a shield. "I have seen everything, which is why you won't be leaving this room either, solicitor," Sealers said casually. He cocked the hammer of the gun. "A shame. A blind, mad duke goes on a rampage, kills his lawyer and his cousin, and then turns the gun on himself. A tragedy for the papers." Mark shifted his weight. His vision was still swimming, the edges of the room blurring in and out of focus, but he could see the gun. He calculated the distance. 10 feet. Too far. "Clara," Sealers said, finally acknowledging her. "Pour me a drink. My hand is tired, and I wish to toast my nephew's departure. It was a mistake." Sealers saw a servant. He didn't see the daughter of a physician. He didn't see the woman who had walked into a ballroom of lions to save a wolf. Clara moved to the drinks cabinet. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She picked up the heavy crystal decanter of brandy. It was full. High proof. She also saw the candle burning on the side table, the same candle Mark had used to test his sight. "Bring it here, girl," Sealers commanded, his eyes never leaving Mark. Clara walked toward him. She feigned a stumble, letting out a small, terrified whimper. "Clumsy cow," Sealers muttered, glancing at her for a split second. That was all she needed. "I am not," Clara said, her voice turning to steel, "a cow." She didn't pour the drink. She swung the heavy crystal decanter with all her might, not at his head, but at the candle on the table between them. She smashed the decanter against the table edge. Brandy splashed everywhere, over the table, over the candle, and directly into Silas's face. The alcohol ignited instantly. Silas screamed as the blue flame roared up, catching his coat and singing his face. He flailed, the gun discharging wildly into the ceiling. Plaster rained down. "Mark!" Now Clara yelled. Mark didn't hesitate. He launched himself across the gap. He wasn't the invalid they thought he was. He was a war hero who had held the line at Balaclava. He tackled his uncle, driving his shoulder into the older man's gut. They crashed into the bookshelf. Heavy encyclopedias tumbled down on them. Silas was strong, fueled by panic and pain, thrashing wildly. He struck Mark in the jaw, reopening the scar on his cheek. Mark grunted but didn't let go. He grabbed Silas's wrist, twisting it until the bone snapped with a sickening crunch. The gun skittered across the floor. "Stay down," Mark roared, pinning his uncle to the floorboards. The library doors burst open again. This time it was Thomas, followed by two uniformed constables and a breathless inspector from Scotland Yard. "Good God," the inspector gasped, taking in the scene. The unconscious Frederick, the burning table, the shattered glass, and the Duke of Wycliffe holding a man in a headlock. Mark looked up. His face was bloodied, his uniform torn, but his eyes, those piercing blue eyes, were clear and focused. "Inspector," Mark said, panting, "I believe you have some arrests to make. I suggest you start with the dead man on the floor." 3 days later, the scandal was the only thing London could talk about. The Times ran the headline, "The Blind Duke Sees the Truth, a Conspiracy of Poison and Greed." Frederick Vane and Silas Blackwood were in Newgate Prison, awaiting trial for attempted murder and fraud. The testimony of Mr. Pendergast and the forensic evidence of the belladonna found in Frederick's possession had sealed their fate. But inside Wycliffe Hall, the mood was somber. Clara stood in the grand foyer. She wore her grey dress. Her modest bag was packed and sitting by her feet. She looked at the grand staircase where she had first seen Mark in his uniform. The house was bright now. The curtains had been thrown open for the first time in years. Sunlight streamed in, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. "You are leaving," a voice said from the top of the stairs. Mark walked down. He didn't use a cane. He moved with the confident stride of a man who owned the world. He stopped 3 steps from the bottom, putting him at eye level with her. "I must, Your Grace," Clara said, clutching her bonnet. "Must you? Is the pay insufficient?" "Mrs. Higgins tells me you are the best maid we have ever had." "I cannot be a maid here, Mark," she said, using his name one last time. "Not after everything. It wouldn't be right. People talk. You are a duke. You have a reputation to rebuild." "My reputation," Mark laughed. It was a rich, warm sound. "My reputation is that of a madman who dances with servants." "I rather like it. Be serious," Clara said, fighting the tears pricking her eyes. "You need a duchess. You need Lady Arabella or someone of her station. Someone who can host your dinners and wear the family diamonds. I am just Clara. I have no dowry. I have no title. I am a doctor's daughter who scrubs floors. Mark descended the final steps. He closed the distance between them. He reached out and took her hands, rough, red, and beautiful, in his. You are not just Clara, he said softly. You are the woman who walked into the fire when everyone else ran away. You are the woman who gave me my eyes back. You are the only person in this entire godforsaken city who saw me, not the title and not the cripple. Mark, I have spent 2 years in the dark, he continued, his thumb tracing the back of her hand. I will not spend another day in the dark without the light of my life. I don't want a duchess who knows the proper way to hold a teacup. I want the woman who knows how to break a decanter over a murderer's head. He dropped to one knee. The staff, Mrs. Higgins, Thomas, the scullery maids, had quietly gathered in the hallway. They held their breaths. Clara Halloway, Mark said, looking up at her with complete devotion. I cannot order you to stay. I can only beg. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Will you be the Duchess of Wycliffe? Clara looked at him. She looked at the scar on his face, the vulnerability in his eyes. She realized that the class divide didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was that they had saved each other. They will shun us, she whispered. The Queen might not receive us. Then we shall have our own parties, Mark grinned. And the music will be much better. Clara smiled, the tears finally spilling over. Yes, she said. Yes, Mark. 6 months later, the Royal Opera House was packed. The season was in full swing. The murmurs began the moment the box seats opened. Is it them, the scandalous Duke, and the Maid? Mark stepped into the box. He looked magnificent in black velvet. He turned and offered his hand to the woman behind him. Clara stepped into the light. She was not wearing grey wool. She was wearing a gown of deep emerald silk that brought out the fire in her chestnut hair. Around her neck, the Wycliffe diamonds glittered, cold stones warmed by the skin of a woman who was fiercely alive. She looked down at the pit, at the hundreds of faces turned upward. She didn't flinch. She squeezed Mark's hand. They are staring, she whispered, echoing the words from that fateful night at Lady Jersey's ball. Mark brought her hand to his lips and kissed it, right there in front of God and all of London. Let them stare, my love, he said. They are just wondering how a blind man managed to find the most beautiful woman in the world. The orchestra began to play. It was a waltz. Mark turned to her. Shall we? I don't know if I remember the steps, she teased. Then the Duke smiled, pulling his Duchess close. We shall invent them. And as they danced, the crowd didn't fall silent out of shock. They fell silent out of awe. Because for the first time in a long time, they were witnessing not a scandal, but a love story that had fought its way out of the darkness and into the light. And that is the story of Mark and Clara. It wasn't magic that saved the Duke of Wycliffe. It was the courage of a woman who refused to let social status dictate her worth. They proved that sometimes the only way to truly see someone is to close your eyes to the world's prejudices and open your heart to the truth. In a world that told them they didn't belong together, they built a world where they were the only two people who mattered. What about you? Would you have the courage to cross the ballroom floor when everyone else was watching? Would you risk everything for a stranger who needed a hand? If this story touched your heart, Please give this video a like. It really helps us share these stories with more people. Don't forget to share this with a hopeless romantic in your life. And hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a tale of love, betrayal, and redemption. Comment below, I would dance if you're on Clara's team. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.